So welcome everyone to our Friday night salon. This evening, we are joined by Kristopher Jansma. We are so excited to have him here. This is Obsessions and Pet Peeves, writing about what we love and what we can't stand in celebration of this fabulous book, Revisionaries, what we can learn from the lost, unfinished, and just plain bad work of great writers. Okay, so to begin, we're going to start with our opening lines activity. And this one in particular, I really, really love as an opening lines because it gets at what we're trying to do here, which is think about revision. How can we make things better, right? So you're going to take this opening. I use whatever pronoun you would like, she, he, they. Maybe this character has all three pronouns. That's cool too, right? So take whatever you would like, think of a character, and they looked at it closely. It was good, but it could be better. What you do is take those sentences, take 5 minutes to write the beginning of a scene with these lines as the opening. Think about what images come to mind for you, what characters emerge. Let yourself be kind of free with it. We're going to write for about 5 minutes.
They asked me to talk a little bit about my, I guess, my journey as a writer. So I thought I'd start with that. I just recently published this book that we're going to talk about tonight. It's called Revisionaries. What we can learn from the lost, unfinished, and just plain bad work of great writers. I guess the journey of my journey as a writer sort of folds right into how I ended up writing this book more recently, which is to say that as a writer, I think I've sort of like failed almost as often as I've succeeded. And in fact, I think my batting average is roughly exactly zero or exactly even. Um, and this was something that for a long time, as a writer, really freaked me out, really worried me, especially in the beginning when I was, sort of getting started, because I had this sense in my head that from all the writers that I loved, when I was younger, and all the writers that I sort of, idolized and aspired to be like, that they were sort of born with this sort of like genius that made them as amazing as they were, right? And the example I talk about in the introduction to Revisionaries is F. Scott Fitzgerald. I had this idea, and I think we kind of get this idea from a lot of places, but our culture more broadly sort of encourages this idea that, the greats of in whatever field, right? Arts, science, technology, etc. They're just born different from the rest of us. They're just, blessed with some gift. And if you think about it, right, we just hear stories all the time about these kind of, singular figures, right, who are just, able to do what no one else can do, right? And so we think about, these writers who are just such great geniuses. Yeah, when I was in college, I fully believe this, and so wanting to be a writer, I felt like I without even really realizing it, I realized that I wanted just somebody to tell me like, am I one of these geniuses or not, right? Like just clear it up, tell me now if I'm not, and I'll, I guess, go do something else and be sad about it. Or maybe, I can go to, my writing professor, or somebody else will sort of tap me on the shoulder and say like, you are good enough, So I ended up signing up for this class I was in college. I was a creative writing major. I convinced one of my professors to let me into this special graduate class with all the graduate students, and it was a class called Faulkner, Fitzgerald, and Hemingway. Three white guys, of course, but it was a whole class about these three great American authors, and I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to take this class. You have to read like almost everything they've ever written, and I'll do that, and I'll figure out like what do they know that I don't know, and then I'll learn their secret or something like that, or I'll figure out if I have anything like their level of talent or ability, right? So yeah, and very quickly this all backfired, which was we started reading Faulkner, and I immediately was like, I don't even understand any of this. I'm totally lost. Obviously, I'm not a great writer. I'll never be a good writer. because I have no idea what The Sound and the Fury is even about. And so I was, already felt like a failure, basically. Then we got to F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I knew The Great Gatsby already from high school. We read Tender as the Night, which I really loved. And then we started reading this book that he was writing when he died, which is a novel called The Love of the Last Tycoon. And it's pretty terrible. Just to be blunt, like no offense to Mr. Fitzgerald, but it's just really bad. And I was shocked reading it as a younger writer, and I thought, oh my God, he really fell apart, and poor Zelda was crazy, and he was dealing with his alcoholism and all this other stuff, and obviously he just like wasted his talent. Like that was sort of the idea of it that I had, that he had been a genius, and then it all sort of fell apart. Um, and this became a weird obsession of mine, and this will tie into what we talk about later, which is, I really believe as a writer, one of the things we have to do is sort of follow our obsessions, as weird as they might be. And I became obsessed with unfinished novels, and it started spending a lot of time sort of digging into the details behind all these fun, sort of weird unfinished books. And I started with The Love of the Last Tycoon, the F. Scott Fitzgerald book. And what I found when I started digging into it was actually totally different from what I expected. It wasn't a story where he had once had this super like easy time writing The Great Gatsby and Tender as the Night because he was such a great genius, and then it all fell away. It was just that he'd always worked really, really hard on all of those other projects. And that with this last book, he just unfortunately, he had a heart attack and he died. So he died while the book was only about a third of the way written, and he wasn't already not happy with it. He knew that the writing wasn't as good as he needed it to be, and he planned on rewriting it all. In the future, one of the notes he left for himself was basically rewrite this all over again, basically. And so yeah, what I realized was he wasn't a genius because he was born with some sort of like magical gift that I didn't have, but rather he was a genius because he worked really, really, really hard at it, and he obviously he rewrote this book, even the one that he didn't finish, like 3 or 4 times, the parts that he had written by hand, and then he typed them, and then he made more edits to that, and he made these elaborate outlines, sort of looking into all these different things. And so, anyway, the long story short, I realized that, yeah, that he was not a genius who succeeded at everything he ever tried to do. In fact, he failed all the time. And this wound up being true for almost all the other writers that I started looking into. And so that's what led to me ultimately writing Revisionaries. I wanted to share the stories of all these different writers that I loved and that I've idolized over the years, but have realized, that there was a lot of sort of mess and failure, and even just plain bad work, right, along the way to the great successes that we remember them for. And so ultimately, I started writing a couple of different sort of columns for the website Electric Literature about these. I think I wrote about 13 columns over the course of a couple of years about different books. The more I looked, the more I found, stories like these just everywhere, and they made me feel a lot better. I said I would come back around to my journey as a writer, and the short version is I wrote a lot of books that didn't sell or weren't very successful, or especially early on. And then I started writing a bunch of short stories, just trying to kind of like come up with new ideas. And I wrote in one year, I challenged myself to write 40 new short stories. And eventually, a bunch of those stories turned into my debut novel, which is called The Unchangeable Spots of Leopards. And the book opens with the narrator talking about how he's lost every novel he's ever written, which for me was a way of sort of writing about my life up until that point, failing to write novels or writing novels that nobody wanted to read. And yeah, so anyway, I found a way to kind of turn that failure, or all those frustrations into material. Also, kind of through those stories that I wrote that year, I ended up writing some pieces that turned into my second book. This is Why We Came to the City, that came out a couple of years after The Unchangeable Spots of Leopards. And at this point, I kind of thought I'm on a roll. I've got got, two books out in span of a couple of years, right? Obviously, it's all easy sailing from here. And lo and behold, it wasn't to be. The next book I tried to write didn't go anywhere. Nobody liked it. I wrote another book after that, and this was sort of early in 2016. Nobody liked that one either. But again, I was sort of realizing that, here I am. I thought I'd sort of gotten through the rough patch on the way to easy success in the future. And what I've kind of come to realize now is that never really happens, or at least it's probably, it doesn't happen for a lot of us. There's always going to be more failures sort of mixed in with any of the successes. And the important part for us is to sort of realize that we have to persevere through those sort of dry spells, rough patches, whatever you want to call them, and keep going because there's always something good around the corner. We don't know how far away, but if we keep writing, we'll eventually get there. That's what I found over and over again with a lot of the Revisionaries books that I was reading, which was a lot of these writers had written, amazing books and then written other ones that nobody liked, and then gone back and, written other ones that were even better. After about 5 or 6 years of floundering and trying to write these other books that didn't work out, I finally this past year published another novel, Our Narrow Hiding Places, which came out in the fall. And it was came out actually about 2 months before Revisionary. So after years of frustration, ended up publishing two books 2 months apart. So anyway, I think the lesson that I learned from all this is just that you have to kind of keep pushing. And in particular, both of these new books kind of came out of things that I was really interested in. I didn't know if other people would be as interested as I was. But they both wound up becoming, I think, books that other people have really enjoyed. And I also wanted to share, if I have a few minutes left here, it looks like I do. I wanted to talk about this idea of obsessions, and one of the chapters in particular in Revisionaries, that I'm not going to have time to read the whole thing, unfortunately, but maybe this will give you a little taste of it. It's a chapter about an author that I really love, Shirley Jackson, who is the author of The Haunting of Hill House, and the short story The Lottery, which remains one of the most popular short stories ever written. Yeah, I was really particularly fascinated with her final book that she passed away in 1965 while she was still working on a book called Come Along With Me. But what I really particularly was obsessed with was that Angela Motorman, the main character in this novel, begins the novel by leaving home after the death of her husband, who she's been married to for a long time. And it's sort of implied, although it's not totally clear, that maybe she's killed him. But either way, she feels this like incredible delight and freedom in the wake of the death of her husband. And we don't know the full story as to why. But we do know that in real life, Shirley Jackson had this very sort of frustrating marriage to a man named Stanley Hyman. They fell in love when they were in college together. And he became a literary critic, and she started writing, she was writing fiction. She was frustrated constantly that when they moved to Bennington so that he could be a professor at Bennington College, that people didn't know who she was. They didn't know, people in town didn't read any of her, had never read her work. People just called her Mrs. Hyman, even though she didn't change her name. And she hated Bennington. She hated all the small-minded people that she felt lived there. But she used that anger and that frustration, that, it's sort of, I call it here kind of like a pet peeve of the people in the town, to write The Lottery, the short story that became so popular at the New Yorker. She kept on kind of following that impulse to write "quote unquote" nasty stories, as the people in the town put it, about the lottery that made them look bad and uncivilized. To bring it back around again, Stanley Hyman ultimately, right as she was, sort of writing "Come Along With Me," she was contemplating finally separating from him and leaving him. And so writing this book was about basically, sort of a fantasy almost of what it would be like to be free of him. And I'm just going to read this last little bit. I know I'm low on time here, but I just wanted to share a little bit about what that book is and what she wrote about it. Um, in the spring of 1965, author Shirley Jackson embarked on a cross-country college lecture tour in her new MG sedan. The cost of the car would be completely covered by the speaking fees that she was earning for the 5 lectures she'd deliver. After the tour, she'd settled back at home with intentions to rest and continue working on her latest novel, Come Along with Me. In one of her final diary entries, she described it as, quote, a funny book, a happy book. A few months later, in August of 1965, Shirley Jackson passed away during an afternoon nap. Doctors would later give the official cause as coronary occlusion due to arteriosclerosis, with hypertensive cardiovascular disease as a contributing factor. Come Along with Me was only about 75 manuscript pages at the time of her death, 6 brief, mostly connected episodes. 3 years later, Stanley Hyman would publish it along with a selection of her essays and stories, including Janice, the story that had made him fall in love with her 27 years earlier. In the collection, Hyman praised these shorter works effusively in his preface, but of Come Along with Me, he wrote only that it was, quote, the unfinished novel at which Shirley Jackson, my late wife, was at work at the time of her death in 1965. She rewrote the first 3 sections. The remaining 3 sections are in first draft. In one of Jackson's final diary entries, she wrote about finally feeling unblocked after a long depression, following President Kennedy's assassination and Hyman's affairs, but beginning to work on Come Along with Me had brought her incredible joy. The novel's about a woman named Angela Motorman, whose husband has just died to her great delight, and about the excitement and freedom she feels in the wake of his death. Jackson concluded her diary entry with these repeated words: laughter is possible, laughter is possible, laughter is possible. And then I'm just going to wrap it up here. Our work should be the place where we feel the most freedom. Indeed, for many of us, it may be the only place in our lives where we can truly be free. This isn't to say there aren't risks involved, of course. Writing the lottery might have made life in North Bennington harder for Shirley Jackson than it was before. But would she have gotten to We Have Always Lived in the Castle without first taking that leap and risking some neighborly disfavor? One drawback of having an active imagination can be how easily we spin up a mental maelstrom of resentment for simply speaking our minds honestly. It helps to remember that these same fears have been faced down by many others before us, and that the reason we still admire some of these geniuses today is that they not only allowed themselves grudges, spite, and frustration, but also channeled those impulses into shaping their greatest work.
So please do stay connected. You can follow Kristopher on Instagram at Kristopher Jansma, same on X at Kristopher Jans there. And then you can reach out via email at jansmac@newpaltz.edu. Please do, if you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can also let us know at Girls Right Now and we can always connect as well. But yeah, thank you so, so much for being here tonight. And with that, thank you for staying for an extra minute. I appreciate it. Please do follow us on all socials. We are just at Girls Right Now. We would love to see you over on our Instagram, Twitter, on Blue Sky, on all of the different platforms. Follow us so you can see all the cool stuff we're doing. And once again, thank you so, so much, Kristopher, for being here with us. It was so wonderful to hear your story and to write together in community with you. And yeah, I thank you everyone so much for being here. It was wonderful to have you.